move to question time, and I call Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, President. My question is to the Minister, representing the Minister for Health, Senator Gallagher. The current shortage of saline IV fluids in Australia poses a very serious risk to the operations of our healthcare system. Last week you confirmed the government had known about an impending shortage since May 2023. Overseas drug regulators, including the FDA, the European Medicines Agency and New Zealand's Pharmac, have confirmed that they have minimal to no issues with their national supplies. Minister, now that it has become apparent that this shortage has resulted from your government's lack of action, will you correct the record and admit that this is not, as the Health Minister has falsely claimed, a global shortage, and finally take responsibility for a crisis of your own making?
Thank you, Senator Ruston. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Ruston for the question. And I know you'd like to blame everything that happens around the world on the Albanese government, but I think it is a bit of a stretch to say that the shortage of IV fluids, which has affected a number of countries around the world, is the fault of the Albanese government. Now, we have put in place a number of steps to ensure that appropriate management of shortage of IV fluids is managed, as you would expect, and this is really common practice.
Minister Gallagher, please resume your seat. Senator Mackenzie, I do not intend to call you to attention the whole of question time. Minister Gallagher, please continue.
Thank you. And these matters are managed, and they're managed very effectively in the health system, as they are on a number of across a wide range of medications should there be a shortage. There are well-established mechanisms to manage these shortages, and the Health Minister met with his colleagues on Friday. They released a joint statement on IV fluid shortages, including the steps being taken to address supply in Australia by the National IV Fluid Response Group, as well as reassurance to the Australian public that health services are continuing. I know the TGA, as I said last week, is also managing a number of steps to ensure that we are doing everything we can to increase supply of fluids for use across our hospital and health system, and all of those steps are being done as well. So this is really, of all the systems there are, the health system manages shortage of supply of certain medications, or in this case IV fluids. They have well-established systems, they do so appropriately, and so they can continue to operate the services that the Australian people expect.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Ruston, first supplementary.
Well, I'm not sure Australians in Hospital would suggest that you've been managing this very effectively. Minister, Australia has sovereign manufacturing capability of saline IV fluids, and your government was given a significant warning of the impending shortage. Since the minister became aware of the issue last year, what discussions has he or the Albanese governor had with Australia's saline manufacturer Baxter to see how they could support them to expand their capacity?
Thank you, Senator Ruston. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, I know that the Health Department has been engaging with all of the suppliers that exist in Australia, including Baxter Healthcare, about how they can work to increase the supply, and they've been working with the TGA. It is expected that supply will continue to be constrained for a little while yet, but all jurisdictions report that they do have supply, and there is supply remaining whilst further resources are put in to securing additional supply. Queensland and Victoria are currently the most affected, with other states having more supply than those, and South Australia's position is improving now they have access to overseas supply through some of the arrangements that the Health Department has put in place. So everybody is working together to ensure continuity of the health system and to maximise the opportunities to alleviate supply. I'll come back if there is anything further I can give the Shadow Minister on Baxter.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Ruston, second
supplementary.
Thank
you. At the height of the COVID pandemic, Australia faced a global supply crisis of key medical equipment with barely any warning at all. Instead of deflecting to the states, the coalition government used the National Medical Stockpile to guarantee our supplies and provide it to state jurisdictions. Minister, why has the Albanese government refused to show similar leadership on the national shortage of saline IV fluids, and is instead misleading the public, deflecting to the states and territories and taking no responsibility at all.
I think that was you, Senator Ayres, and if it was, I'm going to ask you to withdraw.
Withdraw.
Thank you. Minister Gallagher.
And I thank Senator Ruston for the question. And I think the question highlights the big difference between the former Morrison government, which sought to divide and fight with the states, and a government that is working with the states in the national interest to deliver the supply. In relation to Baxter, just further to the question that was asked previously, Baxter is the major supplier of saline products in Australia. Well, you may know that, Senator Ruston, and I'm answering your question. They have advised the TGA that they are working to expand domestic manufacture in 2024, and they are also supplying overseas registered products as an interim measure to meet the increased demand. So everything is working as it should when there is a supply shortage. We don't seek to blame the states. We have a national response to IV fluids that is being managed appropriately by the Commonwealth in conjunction and partnership with the states.
Thank you, Minister. Senate order. Minister Wong.
I apologise to the chamber. I neglected to outline at the commencement of question time a change in ministerial arrangements. I have written to all party leaders about Senator Farrell's absence this week, and ministers will represent in the portfolios in accordance with the correspondence I provided last week.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Senator Walsh.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Women and Minister for Finance, Senator Gallagher. Minister, today is Equal Pay Day, marking the 50 days into the new financial year that Australian women must work to earn the same, on average, as men did last year. Last week, it was promising to see that the gender pay gap has continued to narrow, but the gap is still 11.5%. There is more work to do. Can the Minister please outline why the Albanese Labor government what the Albanese Labor government is doing to reduce the pay gap and why closing the gender pay gap is so important?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Walsh for the question and also acknowledge what how great it is to work with everyone on this side of the chamber who is so focused on closing the gender pay gap and really sees it as a core priority for the Albanese government, and also Senator Walsh's long career in advocating for pay equality and improvements for pay and working conditions for women. Equal Pay Day is a practical way to show what the pay gap means for women. 50 days since June 30th to catch up with what men earned in the last financial year. So in a 48-week working year, this is more than 1 day per week. The good news is that the gender pay gap is reducing and is now at a record low of 11.5%. down from 12% in November last year and down from 14.1% in May 22 when we came to government. Since that time, women's average weekly wages have increased by $173.80. That's a 10.8% increase in average weekly wages. We've also hit a record high in women's workforce participation at 63.2%. And because we've had women's economic equality right front and centre of this government's agenda, we're doing the hard work with 15% pay increases for early childhood educators, 15% pay rise for many aged care workers, both of those, of course, highly feminised industries. We've secured record pay rises for hundreds and thousands of women who work on award wages. We've fixed the bargaining system to get wages moving and encourage more enterprise agreements. We've banned pay secrecy, a big way that was being used to keep women's wages down. We've put gender equality at the heart of the Fair Work Commission's decision-making, and we've got increased transparency in reporting gender pay gaps, so taking away the secrecy that exists in industries specific to see what women get paid.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walsh, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. The Workplace Gender Equality Agency, WGEA, is leading the Equal Pay Day campaign. WGEA have been busy this year releasing 2 new gender pay gap data sets to help keep the focus on the issue of equal pay. Why is keeping the spotlight on the gender pay gap important?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Walsh for the question. And I also like to thank WGEA, the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. It's a small but powerful group that work, their home base is Sydney, and they do an incredible job in keeping this parliament and the Australian community informed about what's happening when it comes to wages for women. The Workplace Gender Equality Agency published employer-level gender pay gaps for employers with 100 employees or more. It's the first time this data has been published, and we heard from many women that went straight to the website to look up what their employer or their favourite brand was paying or had when it came to a gender pay gap. This new data energised an important national conversation. Also this year, the WGEA released the first results for the Commonwealth Public Sector reporting. It's appropriate that the Commonwealth Public Sector reports on their gender pay gap, just like the private sector, and that showed that whilst we had lower remuneration average gender pay gap than the private sector, there is still more work to be done.
Expired. Senator Walsh, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. After years of active wage suppression by the previous government, Australians finally have a government who wants Australians to earn more and keep more of what they earn. Why has this government been so focused on increasing the wages of Australians?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Walsh for the question. And the focus on wages has been to make sure, after a decade of wage stagnation, that we get wages moving again. But also importantly, we know that if you earn more and keep more of what you earn, you can deal with some of the cost of living pressures that we've been seeing. Right. So it's been an important part of our cost of living agenda. And we know that those opposite, they like to keep, particularly those on minimum wages, where they, down low. We know they had that section in their submission to the Fair Work Commission. But we now, after going to the Fair Work Commission, arguing for better wage outcomes for minimum wage workers, including women, and tackling those undervalued and underpaid industries like early childhood education, like aged care. They could have been kicked down the road, but it was more important that we make that responsible investment in the budget so that we can show that women in those highly feminised industries should get better pay and better value for the work that they do.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Sharma.
Thanks, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Minister, how much will an average Australian worker earning between $50,000 and $100,000 per year lose to bracket creep over the next 4 years, inclusive of the latest Stage 3 tax cut?
Thank you, Senator Sharma. Minister, order. Order. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, they'll certainly be getting more in their pay packet than they would if we had not amended the Stage 3 tax cuts. And we remember when we came out with our revised Stage 3 tax cuts, we remember, what was it? Let's go to an election over it. We're going to wind it back and we're going to go to an election over it. And we still think that's the position. Well, they're winding it back. All options are on the table. All options are on the table.
Order on my right.
By lowering the rate and the thresholds, we have dealt with bracket creep in a more efficient way, and more people on those lower and moderate incomes are getting more money in their pocket. And our future governments may decide to do further work in this area, but the revised Stage 3 tax cuts that we put in place dealt with bracket creep, but also importantly ensured that every single person, working person in this country paying tax got a tax cut, as opposed to the heavily weighted tax proposal to those on higher incomes. So we have more appropriately responded to the issues of bracket creep, and we have more appropriately dealt with the fact that every working person in Australia decided a tax cut, and that those under $100,000 deserved a better share of the deal. That was the revised plan that we took, that passed this parliament, in fact, but we know those opposite wouldn't take them too long to put all options on that whiteboard over there, to wipe it off and to put it back in place. We know that's what Senator Hume wants to do. We know that's what Mr Dutton wants to do. They wanted to fight an election over more people getting a better deal on tax. That's the approach the opposition took. It's not the approach this government took. We wanted a better, fairer deal for people that dealt with tax reform at the same time.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Sharma, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Minister, has Treasury completed any analysis as to the total value of bracket creep to government tax receipts over the next 10 years, and if so, what the total value may be? And will this be more or less as a result of Labor's changes to the Stage 3 tax cuts?
Thank you, Senator Sharma. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, Treasury provides forecasts in the normal way, as you would expect. Their forecasts across all receipts and expenses is factored into the budget papers. So that information is there, and that reflected at budget time the revised proposal that we put to this parliament and that we argued with the Australian people and that those opposite want to undo. The tax cuts that we put in place will return bracket creep, and they lower average tax rates for all taxpayers compared to the 2023-24 settings. So, in answer to your question, Senator, yes, they will be factored in to the forecasts. We are very pleased with how our reformed and revised plans both were supported in the parliament and indeed have been supported by the community, because I think the community understands that everyone getting a fairer and better deal were delivered through the revised tax cuts that we championed.
Senator Sharma, second supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, ABS data has revealed that Australian households have now dedicated a near-record 16.4% of gross household income to personal income tax over the past 12 months, while PBO analysis demonstrates bracket creep will cost the average taxpayer between $1,820 and $2,020 over the next 4 years. How can you claim Australians will keep more of what they earn when all the analysis suggests that under Labor they will be worse off?
Thank you, Senator Sharma. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, on the decisions this government have taken, the tax cuts, delivering a tax cut to every working person in Australia, we've returned bracket creep, we've got lower average tax rates, we've got wages moving again, which is something that those opposite were unable or unwilling to do, and all of that feeds into household income. Now, if Senator Sharma is arguing, and I think this is one of the promises that they've dropped out there about lowering tax rates, then work that up for the election. Our policies have been clear. We do rely on income tax to support investments, important investments in our budget, like Medicare, like TAFE system, like the agreements we have with the states in a range of areas, like the NDIS, like aged care. I think any government has to raise revenue, and we appreciate the fact that income tax and company tax and other revenue lines support that.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Faruqi.
Thank you, President. My question is to Minister Wong, representing the Prime Minister. Minister, Mr. Peter Dutton has set a new low in racism with his disgraceful calls for a blanket entry ban on Palestinians fleeing Israel's genocide in Gaza. With Mr. Dutton's history of bigotry, many of us Muslims and people of colour aren't surprised. After all—
Senator Faruqi, please resume your seat. Yes, I will ask Senator Faruqi to withdraw that statement.
I withdraw.
Thank you,
After all, Mr. Dutton is a man who suggested it was a mistake to let Lebanese Muslims into this country, who whipped up false fears about African gangs in Melbourne, and boycotted the apology to stolen generations. More recently, he said that a government that included Muslims from Western Sydney would be a disaster. Mr. Dutton is totally fit to be an MP, let alone opposition leader, or, God forbid, the Prime Minister. Minister, why won't your government show leadership and call out Mr. Dutton's behaviour for what it is: vile, dangerous racism? Why won't you use the R word?
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. I'm going to ask for order across the chamber. Order. Order across the chamber. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Well, it is, I think, disappointing that things that are said by Mr. Dutton, which we do not support, which do not reflect our policy, our values or our approach, are somehow used in that question as a political attack on the Labor government. And what I'd say to you, Senator Faruqi, and what I've said previously when the discussion of racism has occurred over the last decades, and when I'm asked that question, what I have said is that I do not know what is in people's hearts, but I can look at what they say. And I do know also where the words of politicians, and in this case the words of Mr Dutton, where those words land for communities, how people feel when they hear those words. And I know that when Mr Dutton has an opportunity to bring people together or to divide, he almost always chooses the latter. And you referenced some of the times we have seen that. We've seen that when he said that welcoming Lebanese refugees was a mistake. We've seen that when he spread falsehoods about African migrants. We've seen him also say that white South Africans should have fast-track visas. I remember also the words of his political hero, John Howard, when he called for a reduction in Asian immigration because that was bad for social cohesion. So yes, Senator, I do understand, and so do many of us on this side, I think all of us on this side, but some personally, where these words land and what that means for communities. But what we try to do
time for answering has
is to
expired.
govern in the...
Senator Faruqi, first supplementary.
Minister, Mr Peter Dutton is unfortunately not the only one spewing racism in this place. We also have Senator Hanson. Almost 2 years ago, Minister, a parliamentary committee recommended mandatory and anti-racism training for MPs. First Nations people and people of colour are harmed every day by the hateful filth that comes out of the mouths of Senator Hanson and Mr Peter Dutton. When will you finally mandate anti-racism training?
Senator Faruqi, I'm going to ask you to withdraw that reference. Order on my left. Order. Senator Faruqi, the reference to Senator Hanson and Mr Dutton.
President, it's a fact. I withdraw.
Senator
okay,
Faruqi,
I withdraw.
Senator Faruqi, resume your seat. Resume your seat. I am dealing with this. Thank you, Senator Brockman. If you have a different point of order, I'll invite you to stand at the end. Senator Faruqi, you know that when I'm in the chair and I ask for a withdrawal, I expect a withdrawal, not a debate.
I withdraw. It is a shame that in this chamber racism is not called out, but crack down on those who call it out is the goal.
Senator Faruqi, please withdraw your seat. I have a senator on his feet. Senator Brockman.
Madam President, given that the senator has been forced to withdraw two clear breaches of standing orders, that quite frankly withdrawing them makes the questions nonsensical, I just wonder whether these questions shouldn't fall over.
Thank you, Senator Brockman. I will seek the advice of the clerk. I advise the chamber. I am advised that both questions, it is questions to ministers, as most senators in here understand, need to go to matters of government. So it is hard to reconcile how those questions from Senator Faruqi go to government policies or government actions or government business. However, I am also, as you know, as happened in previous cases, I do invite the minister to respond. And I will, I'm assuming you've got 1 second left, Senator Faruqi, so I'm calling it. I invite the minister, if she wishes to respond.
Well, what I can say to you is that the government's view is that what politicians should do and what the Labor Party seeks to do is to bring people together. What we seek to do is to work across the diversity of our community, which we see in the diversity of our caucus, and we seek to bring people together. We don't seek to divide, we don't seek to inflame, we seek to govern in the interests of all Australians, and we seek to bring people together. We do that for 2 reasons. One is that is where our philosophy is, because we believe in collectives. We believe that is the way you find change. That's the way you achieve change. But the second reason we do it is this goes to the heart of what sort of Australia we want. We want an Australia where the diversity of Australia is seen as a strength. We want an Australia that is unified. We want an Australia that looks to the future future positively and optimistically. We do not want a divided Australia, and we will always fight those who seek to divide.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Faruqi, second supplementary.
A recent report by the Australian Human Rights Commission found that the government was reluctant to use the word racism and that its preference is for social cohesion, which has weakened anti-racism work. So the problem isn't social cohesion, it is racism, Minister. And your government is only making it worse with your dog whistling on international students and the abandonment of truth-telling and treaty. When will you stop hiding behind social cohesion and get serious about tackling anti-racism and mandate anti-racism training?
Your time has expired. Minister Wong.
Thank you. I note that the Greens in 2016, under a different leader, promised an Australian Centre for Social Cohesion. I note that Senator Di Natale talked about social cohesion. I note now that somehow that is no longer an appropriate thing to do, and we are being criticised for social cohesion. Whatever the words are, I believe, and we believe, in an Australia where people are not targeted because they are different, and I believe in an Australia where people should be brought together, and that is what we will always work towards. And what I would find interesting, Senator Faruqi, is you say these things about Mr Dutton, but you are prepared to work with him and his people on the CFMEU bill, on the Build to Rent bill, on the Help to Buy bill, on the Net Zero Economy Authority bill, on the NDIS bill, and on creating a new EPA. So next time you come in here and give us all a lecture, let's remember where you vote.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Grogan.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Senator McAllister. We know that there are a range of technologies available to Australians to save on energy bills and reduce emissions. What is the Albanese government doing to support families to improve the energy performance of their homes and save on their power bills?
Minister McAllister.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Grogan for her question. Well, I am very pleased to inform the senator that over the weekend the Albanese government announced $160 million to support Westpac's Sustainable Upgrades Home Loan through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. And this builds on the $60 million we announced with Plenty in June. It is all part of the $1 billion Household Energy Upgrade Fund, and it is complemented by a $300 million commitment, the Social Housing Energy Performance Initiative, which delivers upgrades to social housing. And the investment will mean that eligible customers with older homes or with appliances that don't meet modern energy standards will now be able to access lower interest loans to upgrade them. A house's design, materials and appliances all determine how well it uses energy, and that's why we want to help Australians embrace upgrades and technology that can help with comfort, with cost and, of course, also the climate. We know from analysis undertaken by ClimateWorks that home energy upgrades like double glazing windows, installing solar panels, could save, on average, between 40% and 50% of typical domestic energy bills. And these are all steps that households can embrace if we can provide just a little bit of support, because what we know is that if we can connect households with finance and good information about technology, these are changes that Australian households want to make. This announcement continues the rollout of finance from our $1 billion Household Energy Upgrade Fund, designed to help homes become more energy efficient and to ease the cost of living.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Grogan, first supplementary.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. That's great to hear. I am pleased that the Albanese government is supporting Australian households to improve the energy performance of their homes. Can you step out for us what other energy measures this government is delivering that will help ease cost of living pressures on Australian families and businesses?
Thank you, Senator Grogan. Minister McAllister.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator. Now, on this side of the chamber, we understand that Australians are struggling right now. And this announcement is the latest in a long line of investments that this government has made to ease cost of living and put downward pressure on people's energy bills. So earlier this year, we announced that every Australian household would receive $300 in energy bill relief. Now, this, of course, comes on top of our initial phase of energy price relief, which those opposite opposed, voted against in this chamber. We recognise on this side of Australia that Australians need short-term relief to help with the rising cost of living, but we are also investing in the long-term solutions needed to keep power prices down in the future. And the truth is that Labor is the only party with a real plan to tackle emissions and put downward pressure on power prices.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Grogan, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. It's great to see a structural approach. Could the minister explain why the Albanese government has taken this approach to ease cost of living pressures and drive down emissions?
Minister McAllister.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator. So on this side of the chamber, we believe in clean, cheap, reliable energy that puts downward pressure on energy bills. What does Mr Dutton believe in? He believes in using taxpayer money to invest in the most expensive form of energy that there is, and then take 20 years to build it. Mr Dutton can't even answer basic questions about his risky nuclear plan, like how much will it cost to build? How much will it cost to build? How much will it add to energy bills? None of these answers have been provided. And Peter Dutton, Mr Dutton and the Liberals want you to trust them, but you just have to witness the debacle that was the New South Wales local government nominations to understand that you can't trust these people with anything, with nothing. And if you can't trust them to lodge a form on time, how on earth could you trust them to build a nuclear reactor?
Thank you, Minister McAllister. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator McCarthy. Is your Labor government supporting the Queensland State Labor government to secretly give away freehold land to Aboriginal corporations with little or no communities consultation beforehand under the Queensland State Aboriginal Land Act?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Roberts, for the question. Well, the answer is no, Senator Roberts. There's no secret deals going on. There's no secretiveness in any of this. This is obviously a decision of the Queensland government in terms of what is going on in Queensland in regards to land. I'd just like to remind the Senate that native title recognises that First Nations people have traditional rights and interests to land and waters, and we've had native title legislation in Australia for 30 years, and it continues to work to create jobs and improve lives. And of course, there's always room to improve, Senator Roberts. In June, we announced the Australian Law Reform Commission, which is undertaking an inquiry into the future acts regime in the Native Title Act 1993. And the review will investigate any inequality or unfairness or weaknesses in the regime which governs how development projects can occur on land subject to native title.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts, first supplementary.
Thank you. Do you support the secret attack on 15 Queensland towns currently under attack in this way, including Augathella, Bunuroo, Croydon, Duchess, Eurong, Happy Valley, Laura, Maryborough, Mount Isa, Rainbow Beach, Riverheads, Roma, Thargomindah, Theodore and Toobiya?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister McAllister. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. And Senator Roberts, I have responded in my first question in regards to the beginning of your question, but I will remind you and One Nation of this, because I have looked at your press releases that you've put out. In fact, Senator Hanson's press release on Toobiya community still ignored while arrogant Indigenous corporation plans take over. I note that One Nation puts in there that One Nation is the only party contesting the state election with a policy that Queensland belongs to all Queenslanders. Well, let me remind you, One Nation, the Yugara people are Queenslanders, the Kalkadoon people are Queenslanders, the Yidinji people are Queenslanders, the Gungarai people are Queenslanders. So while you might want to electioneer for the Queensland election, can I just point out that there is no secrecy here, and you degrade this Senate by running down Aboriginal people.
Thank you, Senator McCarthy. Senator Roberts, second supplementary.
Thank you. Are you concerned that the township of Mount Isa, the city of Mount Isa, capital of northwest Queensland, with all its mineral wealth, is subject to Aboriginal corporation claims based on race and greed and made with no real consultation when these resources should be available for all Australians?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. Come on, Senator Roberts, you can do much better than that. You can do much better than that. Let's lift the debate here. Let's not isolate any community based on what you've just said. I think it's disgraceful to actually allege that First Nations people are not a part of this country and don't deserve to be involved in the economic benefits of this country.
Seat. Senator Roberts.
President, thank you. A matter of imputation. We do not allege that the Aboriginal people are not part of this country.
Senator Roberts sets a debating point. Minister McCarthy, please continue.
And so I would say, President, in terms of the people of Mount Isa, I would encourage the First Nations people there, the Kalkadoon people and all people who live in Mount Isa to certainly work together for the benefit of that community.
Thank you, Minister. Senator McKenzie.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Finance, Senator Gallagher. Standards & Poor's global rating agency and Moody's have warned the Victorian government it will face a severe credit rate downgrade if it continues to progress the $200 billion suburban rail loop project. The Victorian Labor government has seen $40 billion in construction cost blowouts that have required the Commonwealth, your government, to pay an additional $5 billion for existing projects in your last budget, without a single additional kilometre for road being built as a result. Minister, has the government received advice from global rating agencies about the potential impact of the suburban rail loop project on Australia's credit rating if Victoria has its credit rating downgraded, or if the Albanese government provides a financial bailout for this project?
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't think it would be normal that we would get information from the ratings agency about an individual project from a state government. That normally would be the focus of the ratings agency. I mean, the ratings agency engagement with the Commonwealth is around our budget and the expenditure related to that, not to an individual project with one state government. As Senator McKenzie would know, in the infrastructure program there are many, many projects with every state and territory government and some with local government in the infrastructure portfolio. So I would say the answer to that question is no. On the broader question of infrastructure, the Minister for Infrastructure has done an extraordinary job in reprofiling and making sure that the infrastructure investment program can actually deliver infrastructure in this country, as opposed to all the promises that were made when you were in government that didn't have funding attached to it. It was like it was this magic pudding that just go, well, we'll pay that out of the IIP. But when we come to government and actually start working through, as Minister King has, you see the level of unfunded programs, and so there were tough decisions that she had to make, including tough discussions with state governments about their increased costs relating to projects. So we've gone through it methodically. The Minister for Infrastructure has done the job that she needed to do, and we take our engagement with state and territory governments seriously. We try to work in partnership with them. But we only allocate funding where it's in the national interest to deliver that project. And if there are management issues around cost and overruns, then we manage those with the states as well.
Thank you, Minister. Senator McKenzie, first supplementary.
The Reserve Bank's monetary policy decision to hold interest rates on the 6th of August recognised continued strong demand in the economy, and the Governor revised up demand growth forecasts, and I quote, due to stronger forecast public spending. That is both your government and Labor state governments. Given the impacts of state Labor debt and borrowing on the national economy, why haven't you, the Treasurer or the Prime Minister had the hard discussion with the states about the ramifications of their profligacy and asked them to rein in spending?
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. The time has expired. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, that is an interesting twist, isn't it, from last week when we were apparently responsible for everything bad that had happened in the country in relation to spending, but it seems that Friday, yes, the Governor was clear, and she was clear that you and all of you in all of your questions were incorrect. when you sought to blame spending in the economy and linking that to interest rates remaining higher for longer, you were wrong. So I would give you leave for all of you to stand up and say that today, if you would like to do that. In relation to the matters that we are responsible for, in relation to the matters that we are responsible for, the Commonwealth budget, would be good to get a question about that, wouldn't it? We have been focusing on cost of living, ensuring that we can help people with some of those pressures and keeping inflation low, and the evidence from the governor supported that approach.
Thank you, Minister. Senator McKenzie, second supplementary.
Minister, how much federal and state wasteful spending and debt, including on CFMEU-influenced projects like the suburban rail loop, will it take before you action to ease the real harm this rampant spending is bringing onto Australian families?
Minister Gallagher.
Please restrain me from mentioning commuter car parks here, and sports grants. What are those other big hidden buckets of funds that had nothing attached to it? To talk to us about wasteful spending. I mean, come on. You were the experts in it. Let's just put a big chunk of money and see if we can allocate it to all of our MPs' electorates during an election campaign. That was your approach to budgeting. The waste and the rorts and the mismanagement that we have fixed in our budgeting, we've returned money to the budget, we've found savings, we've supported projects where they can be supported, we've reduced deficits and produced surpluses, we've lowered the interest costs on our debt. We have done all of that, and we've still found room to support people with cost of living pressures. But I will not take a lecture from those opposite about wasteful spending.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Shoebridge.
Thanks, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Defence. The Albanese Labor government has just signed the AUKUS 2.0 agreement. One of the many, many issues under the agreement is it allows for the US to provide 1 year's notice and walk away from the deal if it thinks it would be detrimental to the US military to provide Australia with nuclear submarines or materials. Keeping in mind the US does not make enough submarines for its own needs and won't for the foreseeable future, why did your government sign up to an agreement that will allow the US to walk away at any moment and take all their stuff with them?
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. Minister Wong.
Thank you. Well, first I would make the point, and he's entitled to hold this position, but we disagree with the fundamental position of the Australian Greens with Senator Shoebridge in the defence portfolio, because they are not supportive of AUKUS. I'm sorry? I need to say it more often. No, that the Greens don't support AUKUS. I know that you don't support AUKUS. So obviously the question is motivated from a perspective of someone who doesn't actually think this is a good thing for the country. We do. Obviously, and there has been a lot of work that has been undertaken, including in the US, and I acknowledge the work of Ambassador Rudd in working with both sides of politics in the US to ensure that domestic legislation was passed in really quite extraordinary timeframes to try and lock in as much progress as is possible. The reason we support AUKUS is we think it is central to the protection of the nation. Of course, it would be good to live in a world where we did these sorts of hard decisions.
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Shoebridge.
President, it's on relevance. My question was about the 1 year get-out-of-jail-free clause.
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. That was part of your question. I'll remind the Minister of that part of your question. Minister Wong.
Thank you. In relation to the terms of the agreement, which will go through the normal parliamentary process, obviously that was negotiated between the parties. There will be aspects of it, no doubt, that will attract scrutiny. I would make the point no government can ever assure forever that a future government will do something, and that is unsurprising. But what I am pleased to report to the Senate is the extent of bipartisan support for AUKUS for the strategic reasons that I know you don't accept. but the extent of bipartisan support, which was very clear to me
Thank
in the
you,
recent
Minister.
AUSME
The time
meetings.
for answering has expired. Senator Shoebridge, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Minister, under this agreement, if the US ever sells us a second-hand submarine and then that breaks down and the reactor starts leaking radioactive waste into Australian waters and harming sailors and the environment, it's Australia, not the US, that has to pay the damages under this agreement. Why would you agree to indemnify the US in this way?
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. Minister Wong.
Thank you. Can I just, in relation to the first point about the year's notice, I would again reference the fact that that assertion ignores the progress and architecture in place to deliver AUKUS, including the bipartisan support in the United States.
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Yes, and the minister is being relevant. You referenced the agreement, and the minister is answering in relation to the agreement. Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. Minister Wong.
I was referencing the year's notice that formed part of both the first and the second question. I would note that bipartisan support in the US with the passage of important provisions of the National Defence Authorization Act in the US Congress by December 2024 to enable the transfer of Virginia-class and the transfer of skills and knowledge already underway in the Australian industry in the RAN, Royal Australian Navy personnel who are already engaged on how to build, operate and sustain nuclear-powered submarines. Now, Ms Senator Shoebridge, I know this is not something you agree with. I know this is something you don't agree with, but this is a project which we do regard as important for Australia's national security.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Shoebridge, second supplementary.
President, perhaps we'll get this answered. Why is there no mechanism in the agreement for any compensation to Australia from either the US or the UK? If the US does walk away, Australia has no clawback mechanism to get the billions and billions of dollars we've already given to the US. Minister, how could your government have signed this?
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. Minister Wong.
Well, Senator, fundamentally you don't agree with it. And you're asking me a question about a hypothetical. We are focused on delivering it. It is a hypothetical. I'll take the interjection from the Leader of the Greens. It is a hypothetical. If this doesn't happen, then that's by definition...
Order. Order. Senator Shoebridge, I've called you to order. Minister, please continue.
Well, by definition it's a hypothetical if this doesn't happen then. But my point is that the reason that the Australian...
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Shoebridge.
President, had I asked the hypothetical, it would have been out of order.
Senator
My question is directed to what's in the agreement.
That is a debating
what's in the agreement
point.
is a thing for now.
Please resume your seat. Minister Wong, please continue. Senator Ruston, I've called the Senate to order. Minister.
Thank you, President. Well, I again made the point. This treaty will go through the normal processes before ratification and go through the normal process of scrutiny within the Parliament. I'm sure Senator Shoebridge will be very active through that process. But I again make this point. The Australian Greens do not support the acquisition of a new submarine capability. So we all know why these questions are being asked.
Thank you. Time, Minister. Senator Stewart.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator McCarthy. Last week, the Senate Legal and Constitutional Affairs References Committee released findings from its inquiry into missing and murdered First Nations women and children. I just want to take the time to acknowledge and thank committee members for their important work on this matter as well. Can the Minister outline the importance of this inquiry and the stories shared by First Nations women and their families?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister.
Thank you,
McCarthy.
President, and I thank Senator Stewart for the question. I certainly do welcome the report, President, tabled last week of the Senate Legal and Constitutional Affairs References Committee. The inquiry has shone a light on a harrowing set of stories experienced by First Nations women and children, and I know the Senate inquiry held a large number of hearings across the across the nation, and I take the time to acknowledge the Chair, Senator Scarr, and the Deputy Chair, Senator Green, but in particular the passionate determination of Senator Cox. I want to thank the many families and organisations who gave evidence at the hearings, and to acknowledge the unspeakable pain behind every story shared as part of the inquiry, to acknowledge the real and significant grief experienced by families and entire communities. And to those who have come forward to share their experiences with the committee, I want to assure you that we see you and we hear you, and we hear your stories, and we certainly see your pain. It takes bravery to share these stories, and it takes great strength. We know that families have been seeking answers for a very long time, some up to many decades, over 50 years. We thank you for sharing your experiences with the committee, and also thank the committee members for your dedication to listening to these stories and for delivering a set of recommendations for the government to consider. President, there are many recommendations spanning a number of critical areas that need to be addressed, and our government is committed to carefully working through the recommendations in this inquiry.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Stewart, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Can the Minister outline the government's approach to considering the recommendations made in the inquiry report?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister McCarthy.
Our government will carefully work through the recommendations put forward. I will certainly work closely with my colleagues across the government, with the Attorney-General and with the Minister for Social Services as a starting point. We'll take the time to consider the recommendations put forward. The report makes clear the scale of the problem experienced by First Nations women, experiences of violence compounded by racism in the very institutions that are meant to help. We know First Nations women continue to experience disproportionately high levels of violence, and First Nations women are 34 times more likely to be hospitalised and 6 times more likely to die from family and domestic violence than non-Indigenous women across the country. Horrific figures. We are working and determined to turn these figures around. Strong and safe First Nations families are a key focus of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Stewart, second supplementary.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister. Can the Minister explain the government's approach to reducing family and domestic violence in First Nations communities?
Minister McCarthy.
We know there is no one single isolated factor contributing to the experience of family violence for First Nations people, and it is critical that national policies are responsive to the multifaceted experiences faced by First Nations women and children, including the ongoing impacts of colonisation, racism, intergenerational trauma that compound experiences of violence. The National Plan includes a dedicated Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Action Plan. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Council, made up of respected First Nations women and men with experience in this sector, led the development of the standalone action plan. The action plan is supported by $194 million to fund specific actions and support the safety of First Nations women and children, like funding the family violence prevention legal services and increasing prevention services, programs and campaigns for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children.
Thank you. Senator Duniam.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment and Water, Senator McAllister. And I refer the Minister to plans for a new billion-dollar gold and silver mine, which proponents Regis Resources say now is not viable because of an 11th-hour decision to block the project, despite the project having all state and federal environmental approvals in place. Given this massive hit to our regional economy will cost over 800 jobs, does the Minister agree with Regis CEO Jim Beyer, who said, and I quote, "Regis considers this shatters any confidence that development proponents Australia-wide, both private and public, can have in project approval timelines and, of course, outcomes." Mr Beyer goes on to say that this will affect any project of any type anywhere by finally saying, "This decision highlights the increasing sovereign risk of investing in Australia." When will your government stop scaring off investment and killing off jobs?
Thank you, Senator Duniam. Minister McAllister.
What about ducks?
Minister, order. I have the Minister on her feet. Minister McAllister.
Thank you, President. Well, I am aware that the Minister for the Environment and Water has placed a protection order on a site near Regis Resources' McPhillamys Gold Project in New South Wales. This decision, as I understand it, affects the proposed site for Regis's tailing or waste dam. It does not stop the development of the mine. I understand.
Order across the chamber. The minister is answering the question. Minister
All the mining
McAllister.
engineers over there.
I understand that Regis Resources has assessed around 4 sites and 30 potential options for the tailings dam, and I hope that the company can find an alternative site for its tailings and waste dam. Genuine partnership with First Nations peoples is essential for the Australian mining sector to reach its full potential, and the Australian government is committed to that goal. And the government has been unequivocal in its support for mining, which employs 300,000 Australians, announcing very significant measures for resources in the budget. I will make the observation that there are striking similarities between this decision and a decision made by the former Minister for the Environment, Ms Ley, who is now the Deputy Liberal leader. And so back in 2021, she made a very similar decision just down the road from this same site. And she made that decision after listening to the views of the same local traditional owner group, the Wiradjuri Traditional Owners Central West Aboriginal Corporation, and she said at the time she was protecting it because of its cultural
Thank you, Minister. The time has expired. Senator Duniam, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Given this project had already secured all state and federal environmental approvals required and was blocked after many years of assessment and consultation, supported by local traditional owners, will the minister seek to amend the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act to remove this serious sovereign risk and uncertainty, killing off jobs and investment in this country? And if not, why not?
Thank you, Senator Duniam. Minister McAllister.
Thank you, President. Well, it cannot be the case that, perhaps you do wish to describe it in this way, but sovereign risk is not the same as being asked to comply with existing laws for the Australian government. These are not the same things. It is, of course, the case that—
Order. Minister McAllister, please continue.
It is, of course, the case that the government has embarked on a broader process of reform for our cultural heritage arrangements. And indeed, we had understood that this had been embarked upon as part of a bipartisan process, because everyone in this chamber, I think, recalls what happened at Juukan Gorge. I think everybody remembers the national level of concern that was articulated at that time. And everybody remembers that there was bipartisan agreement that heritage laws needed to be reformed. And if you change that position, you might inform the chamber.
Senator Duniam, second supplementary.
Nice way to try and conflate issues here, but given the government seem happy to kill off projects that generate jobs and economic activity, along with their funding of the Environmental Defenders Office, millions of dollars every year, does the minister agree with the concerns of the Minerals Council of Australia CEO, Tanya Constable, who says that these shifting requirements created by the Albanese government undermine investment and risk jobs across Australia? When will this Labor government end the attack on our economy through these environmental laws?
Thank you, Senator Duniam. Minister McAllister.
Well, once again, we have the opposition asserting that environmental laws, which have been in place for a very long period of time, including under the government that you were part of, Senator Duniam, are in some ways hostile to the interests of Australia's economy. It's actually not our approach. We believe firmly that our economy can prosper and indeed flourish through an approach which respects the role of business in our economy, but also respects and acknowledges our shared commitment to protecting our cultural heritage and protecting our environment. Now, it's on that basis, of course, that we've commenced reform processes, both in relation to the EPBC Act and in relation to cultural heritage. And the one thing that you might do is actually take steps to support the reforms which are coming before this parliament, and you will have the opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Minister. Senator O'Neill.
Very much, President. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. I note that low wages were a deliberate design feature of the Liberal and National Party economic plan for over a decade. And now Australian households are struggling with the rising cost of living pressures. The Albanese Labor government was elected on a promise to get wages moving and Australians into secure, well-paid jobs. How has the Albanese Labor government's agenda helped to support a strong and resilient labour market, to keep Australians in jobs and to create new opportunities for people to work and earn?
Order. Order. If you can't listen in silence, then please leave the chamber. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator O'Neill, one of the many champions of job creation on this side of the chamber. And I note, Senator O'Neill, that there are now around 990,000 reasons why the opposition is unhappy over there, because that's the number of extra jobs that have been created in Australia since the Albanese Labor government came to office. Nearly 990,000 new jobs created, the most in a single parliamentary term in any government's history in our country. Now, we know that there's still a lot more work to do. We know that many Australians are doing it tough, but one of the best ways that we can help Australians deal with cost of living pressures is by helping them into work, and that's exactly what we're doing, with total employment in Australia now standing at a record high of 14.5 million jobs. And unlike those opposite, the Albanese Labor government has been focused on creating good jobs, jobs that give people enough hours to meet their needs and jobs with pay rises and better conditions. Isn't it interesting? The notion of good jobs is something that all the opposition chime up about. They've been basically asleep all of question time, wishing they could just get back to their homes. But the minute we talk about good jobs for Australians, that's what fires them up, because we know that's not what they need. The latest ABS data shows that Australians aren't moving into just any jobs.
Minister Watt. Senator Mackenzie.
Relevance. I think the minister is actually confusing our boredom with question
Senator
time.
Mackenzie, that is a debating point. Please resume your seat. Minister Watt.
It's good to see they are awake at last. It only took a bit over an hour. The latest ABS data shows that Australians aren't moving into just any jobs. They're moving overwhelmingly into full-time jobs. 63% of all jobs growth under the Albanese government's watch has been full-time jobs. 625,000 more full-time jobs created in Australia in mining, in manufacturing, in the services economy, in nursing, in teaching, all those good full-time jobs that have been created. And in fact, the number of people in full-time jobs across Australia now stands at a record high of 10 million. Now, despite challenging economic conditions, we've managed to keep unemployment low while continuing to bring down inflation.
The time for answering has expired. Senator O'Neill, first supplementary.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, for that answer.
Senator O'Neill, resume your seat, please. Senator Mackenzie, come to order or leave the chamber. Senator O'Neill, please continue.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. Given Mr Peter Dutton and the Liberals and Nationals voted against the government's initiatives to get more women into the workforce, how has the Albanese Labor government reduced barriers to work and delivered fairer wages for women after 10 years of low wages, insecure work and unequal gender policy settings under the Coalition?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Watt.
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. I'm pleased to remind all Australians that things have changed for Australian women since the Albanese government came to office, because it's women that have led the jobs boom. 52% of all jobs growth in Australia has been for women since the Albanese government was elected. That's an extra 510,000 women in jobs in Australia since we were elected. But again, women are not just getting into any jobs. They're more likely to be full-time. 60% of all women who've taken up work since we came to government are in a full-time job. And none of this is a coincidence. Just as we know, the opposition had a deliberate design feature of their economy to bring down wages, it is a deliberate design feature of the Albanese Labor government's economic policy to get more women into work and to get more Australians into work. It's the result of a government that prioritises economic equality for women, and as Senator Gallagher was talking about, we've also brought down the gender pay gap to the lowest level on record at 11.5%.
The time for answering has expired. Senator O'Neill, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. In the face of cost of living pressures, how is the Albanese government helping Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn while relieving cost of living pressures? And why are these reforms so important, Minister?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Watt.
President, thank you, Senator O'Neill. And it was good, I don't know if you caught it earlier in question time, but Senator Sharma was recognising that the Albanese government is helping Australians keep more of what they earn. So I'm pleased that you're paying attention to what we're saying and you're now picking up our mantra as well. Maybe you'll come on board and back that kind of thing as well, Senator Sharma, because unlike Peter Dutton and the Coalition, we see strong and sustainable wages growth as part of the solution to the cost of living challenge, not part of the problem. We've delivered wage increases while keeping unemployment at record lows, getting more people into jobs and getting inflation to moderate. Now, we do know that people are under pressure and there's still more to be done, but just imagine how much worse things would be for Australian families if the Liberals and Nationals had their way and those record employment figures and pay rises never happened. Under those opposite, the unemployment rate averaged 5.6%. We've got it down to 4.2%. It took the Coalition their entire wasted decade in office to lift the minimum wage by as much as we have in our first term. Under Labor, you'll earn more and keep more of what you earn.
The time for has expired, and I remind you to refer to others in the other place by their correct title. Minister.
Thank you, President. I ask that further questions be placed on notice.